19 World of Fareed Zakaria GPS special, Sunday morning, 10 Eastern.
We've got some breaking news tonight. More concern about coronavirus exposure in the administration. Here to discuss, our White House correspondent Caitlin Collins and Dr. Ashish Jha, director of the Harvard Global Health Institute. Caitlin, understand that you have some breaking news about the FDA commissioner quarantining, self-quarantining. What is that about?
Yeah, Don, we're learning from the FDA spokesperson that the FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn is going to self-quarantine for the next 14 days after they say he came into contact with someone who has since tested positive for coronavirus. Now, he sent a note to staff earlier telling them that he was going to follow the CDC guidance about quarantining for the next 14 days. He didn't say which staffer it was that he came in contact with or which person it was that he came in contact with that had coronavirus. But Don, of course, we learned today it's Vice President Mike Pence's press secretary, Katie Miller, who tested positive. She had tested negative yesterday, was not showing any symptoms, and then came to work today and underwent a daily test, which they've now since implemented since yesterday. And now that is why he is going to be self-quarantining for the next 14 days. Now, of course, this is standard guidance, and I feel like most people have learned that if you've been around someone who's tested positive, most people have realized that the CDC says you do go into self-quarantine for 14 days. But Don, it's notable because there are several other people that obviously came into contact with the vice president's press secretary, who's been heavily involved with the coronavirus task force. And so far, we are only learning of the FDA commissioner who is going to be self-quarantining.
Caitlin, I understand that these cases are mounting within the president's inner circle. I talked a bit about it in my opening statement tonight. But just how concerned is everyone in the West Wing tonight?
I think it's hitting a lot closer to home for people after this week, because not only did you see the president's personal valet test positive for coronavirus, someone who everyone in the West Wing knows, but now you've seen the vice president's press secretary. And we're also learning tonight that Ivanka Trump's personal assistant has also tested positive for coronavirus. Now, she's not a White House staffer. She works for Ivanka Trump in a personal capacity. And we are told that she has not been around Ivanka Trump for several weeks. She's actually been teleworking for the last several weeks instead. And we are told that Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner tested negative today. So we should note that for the audience. But Don, really what it shows you is just how widespread this coronavirus truly is. And that's what it seems to be hitting home for West Wing staffers. And now the questions that we're going to see over the weekend and going into next week is whether or not this changes any of that protocol that we've been seeing inside the West Wing. Because while they've been doing daily tests for senior staffers, for those meeting with the president, and temperature checks for everyone coming on the ground, we haven't seen a widespread amount of staffers wearing masks or anything like that. So that's the question. Now that we've seen, 3 people in this realm test positive this week, what do they do going forward?
Doctor, and that's where you come in. The president didn't wear a mask today when meeting with World War II veterans. The vice president was out yesterday delivering PPE, but no mask. Katie Miller yesterday also not wearing a mask. Is now the time that the White House needs to be following its own guidelines? Is this a wake-up call for them?
So, Don, thank you for having me on. I sure hope it is. The tests are really important, and I'm glad that folks in the White House are getting tested on a regular basis. I think I said before, it'd be great if the rest of America could also get tested on a regular basis, but that's okay. We don't have those tests for the rest of the country. But, in terms of the White House, it is really important that people start wearing masks because the tests alone are not perfect. And especially the World War II veterans thing, that really hit home for me because the bottom line is, I take care of veterans in the VA and I know how vulnerable those people are. And the president should realize that he can test negative. He can still have the virus, and wearing a mask would be very helpful in protecting those veterans.
Dr. CNN was told that Miller tested negative on Thursday, positive on Friday morning. Could she have been contagious before testing positive? Is this a testing issue?
Yeah, so the test is not perfect, and there is somewhere between a 20 and a 30% false negative rate. That means 20 to 30% of the times you can have the virus and not test positive for it. So she's probably had it for a couple of days. She might have been spreading the virus during that time. That would be very typical of what happens with this virus. And this is why, even when you test negative, it's really important to be wearing a mask, especially if you're around high-risk people.
Doctor, thank you. Caitlin as well. A record 20.5 million Americans lost their jobs in April, and now the country's facing unemployment numbers not seen since the Great Depression. The economic